In a world where perfection is everything, Lena, a small-town girl, finds herself caught in the orbit of Damien Voss, a ruthless billionaire with a heart sealed by pain and ambition. Their unlikely connection begins with a simple mistake spilling wine on his prized vest. But what follows is a passionate, emotional journey that forces them both to confront their deepest fears and desires. Will they break down the walls they've built, or will their differences tear them apart? Don't miss the twists and turns of this gripping story. Where are you watching from? Hit subscribe to hear more. The grand hall of the Celestine room shimmered with elegance, the golden chandeliers casting a warm glow over the polished mahogany floors. Laughter floated like champagne bubbles among the tables, each one draped in white linen and surrounded by DCE's most powerful elite. This was not just any restaurant, it was the place where billionaires brokered silent deals over aged Bordeaux and politicians toasted to invisible victories. And tonight, Lena Carter was praying to simply survive her shift. Dressed in a crisp white blouse and black slacks, Lena adjusted the tray in her hands, balancing 6 crystal wine glasses with the precision of a tightrope walker. Her palms were slightly damp, and she could feel the knot of anxiety tightening in her chest with every step toward table 7, the VIP table. The one that had made every server in the back suddenly find something else to do. Because at that table, seated in commanding silence, was none other than Damien Voss. At 26, Damien had already built an empire of hotels stretching from Dubai to New York. Rumors swirled about how he negotiated contracts like a lion, circling prey, calm, patient, and utterly merciless. He was tall, sharp, featured, with piercing eyes the color of smoke before a storm. Tonight, he wore a deep navy vest tailored to perfection, the kind that didn't belong on just any man, it belonged to him. Lena had only seen him once before from a distance, but even then, she had felt the chill that followed him like a shadow. Her fingers curled tighter around the tray. She had worked at the Celestine room for just over 2 months, enough time to know that mistakes here were not forgiven, they were executed. And she couldn't afford to lose this job. Not with rent overdue. Not with her mother calling from North Carolina needing more medicine. Not when this city had already chewed her up and was just about to spit her out. As she approached the table, the low hum of conversation faded. Damien was speaking in a clipped British tone to a man in a charcoal suit, something about a new resort opening in Patagonia. Lena took one more steadying breath, shifted the tray slightly, and leaned in to place the first glass. And that's when it happened. A waiter rushed by behind her too close. His shoulder brushed hers just enough to throw her balance. The tray wobbled. Her heart stopped, and before she could correct it, one of the wine glasses tipped sideways, and a dark red stream of liquid spilled slow, horrifying, unstoppable across Damien Voss's vest. The restaurant froze. Conversations died mid-sentence. Forks paused mid-air. Even the pianist missed a note. Lena's face went pale. The tray trembled in her hands. The stains spread like blood on velvet, soaking into the luxurious fabric. Damien Voss slowly turned toward her, his expression unreadable. "What?" he said, his voice quiet but terrifying. "Did you just do?" Lena's throat dried instantly. I'm so sorry," she whispered, eyes wide, mortified. He studied her, silent and motionless, and that somehow made it worse. There was no anger in his eyes, only cold detachment, like she was an insect under glass. "Do you even understand what you've done?" he said, his tone sharp enough to draw blood. "This vest cost more than your next 6 months of paychecks." Her lips parted, the shame crashing over her in waves. I'll pay for it, she blurted, desperation leaking into her voice. I, I, I didn't mean to. Before he could respond, a louder, angrier voice cut in. That's it. You're fired. Lena spun around. Her manager, red-faced and shaking, was already storming toward her. No, please, it was an accident, she cried, stepping back. You've humiliated our top client. Get your things and go now. Panic surged in her chest. She couldn't lose this job. Not like this. But then, another voice, low, calm, and absolute, sliced through the room like a guillotine. No, she stays. Every eye turned to Damien. Lena's breath caught. Her manager froze. Sir, but the manager began, but Damien raised one hand, silencing him without so much as a glance. He looked at Lena. I have a different way for her to make up for this. She blinked. What? Be my personal assistant. For 1 month. Consider it paying your debt. The room held its breath. Lena felt hers leave her body. Was this a trap? A punishment? But she had no choice. With shaking hands, she whispered, Okay. Damien nodded once. Be at my office. 8 sharp. Don't be late. And then he turned and walked away, leaving Lena standing there, wine-stained guilt and all, as her entire world turned upside down. Lena stood outside the gleaming glass tower of Voss International, her breath catching in her throat as she craned her neck to take in its sheer height. The building stabbed into the sky like it owned it sleek, modern, untouchable. She tugged at the sleeves of her thrift. Store blazer, suddenly hyper, aware of every scuff on her shoes, every wrinkle in her skirt, every tiny detail that screamed, You don't belong here. Still, she stepped forward. The morning crowd bustled around her, polished professionals in tailored suits and high-end heels, moving with purpose. Their conversations clipped and full of jargon she didn't understand. She moved like a ghost among them, invisible and yet hypervisible at the same time. Inside the lobby, everything shimmered. Floors of white marble gleamed under the soft golden light. There was a fountain in the center, an actual fountain, trickling peacefully as if the people who worked here had time to stop and appreciate it. Lena, breath shallow, approached the sleek reception desk where a woman in a fitted black dress sat, posture perfect, expression unreadable. Hi, Lena said, clearing her throat. Mr. Voss asked me to... We've been expecting you, the woman interrupted smoothly, barely glancing up. Take the private elevator to the top floor. Lena blinked. Oh, okay. The ride up felt eternal. The elevator was lined with mirrors that offered no mercy. Her reflection looked like a walking apology. She tried not to fidget, but her hands wouldn't stop twisting in front of her. Her stomach churned with uncertainty. She had no idea what Damien Voss expected from her or why. Of all things, he wanted her as his assistant. When the elevator doors finally slid open, she stepped into a space so pristine, it felt like it had never been touched by a human hand. Damien's office was massive, with floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the DOAC. Skyline in all its cold glory. Black leather furniture, polished wood. A desk that looked more like a throne than a workspace. And behind it sat Damien Voss, dressed in another tailored suit, the morning light catching the edge of his jawline like it had a personal vendetta. You're late, he said without looking up. Lena blinked, glancing at her phone. It's 7:59. You should have been here 5 minutes ago. A good assistant is always early. His voice was as emotionless as the steel elevator she'd just ridden in. She bit the inside of her cheek and fought the urge to snap back. Instead, she squared her shoulders. What do you need me to do? Damien finally looked up, his storm gray eyes locking onto hers with unsettling precision. For a moment, he didn't say anything, just studied her like she was an equation he hadn't decided was worth solving. Then he leaned back and smiled, not warmly, not kindly, but with the air of someone setting a trap. "Let's see if you can keep up." He launched into a rapid-fire list of instructions. "Schedule all my meetings for the week. Cancel lunch with Richard Wellington, but reschedule it for Thursday at 1:00. Prepare the financials for my 10:00 a.m. meeting. And get me an espresso. Extra strong. No sugar." Lena's head spun. She tried to memorize everything as fast as he spoke, nodding even though panic clawed at the back of her throat. "Got it," she said, even though she definitely didn't. Then she turned on her heel and walked out of the office before he could see the sheer terror on her face. The next few hours were chaos. She didn't know where anything was, who anyone was, or how to use the company's scheduling system. She had to Google the difference between a quarterly projection and a fiscal review. She accidentally called Wellington's assistant by the wrong name and got barked at for it. And when she finally brought Damien his espresso, he took one sip, raised an eyebrow, and pushed it aside without a word. By noon, her feet ached and her brain felt like scrambled eggs. Damien never raised his voice, but every glance, every silence, every corrected mistake cut deeper than any shout could. Yet every time she stumbled, she forced herself to recover, because Lena Carter didn't quit. When the day finally ended, she barely made it back to the elevator. She turned once to glance into his office. Damien was still there, typing, unmoving. But for the first time, she noticed the tension in his shoulders, the crease in his brow. He didn't look like a god anymore. He looked tired. And she didn't know why, but something about that made her stay a little longer in the hallway, just long enough to wonder what secrets a man like Damien Voss kept locked behind that cold perfection. The second day began even earlier. Lena arrived at 7:15 a.m., determined not to give Damien Voss another reason to look at her like she was a walking disappointment. She wore the cleanest blouse she owned and had tied her hair back in a neat bun, hoping it made her look more competent, even if she didn't feel that way inside. When she stepped off the elevator and walked into the top-floor office, he was already at his desk, sleeves rolled up, fingers dancing across the keyboard like he was composing a symphony of dominance. He glanced up once, nodded briefly, then returned to his screen. That was it. No greeting, no acknowledgement of her effort. Lena exhaled slowly, forced herself to walk confidently past his desk, and settled into the small workspace just outside his office. The next hour was brutal. He didn't bark commands, he tossed them over his shoulder in that maddeningly calm voice, expecting instant execution. When she mispronounced a foreign client's name on a call, he corrected her mid-sentence, never looking up. When she printed the wrong version of a report, he held up the pages, glanced at her, and said, "Try again," before tossing them aside like junk mail. And when she brought him another espresso, this time from the cafe, he specifically mentioned he took a sip, paused, then set it down without a word. She wanted to scream. She wanted to cry. But mostly, she wanted to prove him wrong. Lena pushed herself harder than she ever had. She memorized names, reorganized his calendar in color, coded precision, and watched YouTube tutorials in the break room on how to format quarterly briefs. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, her mind constantly racing to stay one step ahead of whatever curveball he'd throw next. By noon, she was drenched in silent exhaustion, but she didn't stop. Around 3 p.m., a printer jam nearly broke her. She wrestled with the ancient machine for 10 minutes, hands covered in toner, her hair falling loose from its bun. She was crouched on the floor, trying to reinsert the paper tray, when a shadow loomed over her. "You're wasting time," Damien said flatly, his arms crossed. "I'm fixing the thing that gives you your papers," she muttered, not even thinking. Silence. She froze, realizing what she'd just said. Slowly, she looked up at him. His eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but curiosity. "You always talk to your boss like that?" "Only when the printer's trying to kill me," she said, before she could stop herself. To her absolute horror, his mouth twitched. Just for a second. The tiniest hint of a smirk. He said nothing, just turned and walked away. Lena blinked, stunned. Was that a human reaction? Did the Ice King of Voss International actually have a sense of humor? She didn't have time to process it. A delivery came, a call needed screening. A last-minute meeting was added to his schedule. And still, she kept up. When the sun dipped behind the skyline and the rest of the office emptied, she was still typing, her back aching, her eyes dry. Damien hadn't left either. He sat at his desk, laser, focused, not once checking the time. Lena stretched her arms and leaned back, ready to pack up, when she realized something. She had survived. She had made it through the day. Barely, yes. Bruised, yes. But standing. She stood slowly, gathered her things, and was about to slip out when she heard his voice. "You did better today." She turned, eyes wide. Damien hadn't looked up. He was still typing. What?" "Don't make me repeat myself," he said dryly. Her lips parted, confused, surprised. Then he waved a hand toward the door like he was dismissing a meeting. "Be here earlier, tomorrow." Lena nodded once and walked out, her head spinning. That night, lying on her mattress in her tiny studio apartment, Lena stared at the ceiling, thinking not about the insults, the mistakes, or the espresso that wasn't strong enough, but about that one moment. The almost smirk, the compliment he refused to repeat, the way he didn't fire her. And for the first time since she'd arrived in Washington, she didn't feel like a girl on the verge of collapse. She felt like a girl on the verge of something else entirely. The days blurred into a rhythm: demand, pressure, execution. Lena woke up earlier, worked harder, and came home later than she ever had in her life. Every morning began with Damien's voice, precise, cool, authoritative, and every night ended with the ghost of his gaze lingering in her mind. She learned how he liked his reports formatted, which board members he trusted, and exactly how many seconds it took for him to lose patience when something wasn't right. He never raised his voice, but his silences spoke louder than thunder. Yet she matched him, step for step, and never backed down. She had been working as his assistant for 2.5 weeks when it happened. It was nearly midnight, and the office was empty except for the two of them. Lena had stayed behind to finish a presentation for a pitch the next morning. Damien was still in his office, hunched over his laptop, the only light in the room coming from the twin pools of glow on their desks. The world outside the glass walls was dark and still, the city lights flickering like distant stars. Her fingers typed slower now, her back stiff, her eyes burning from too many hours staring at screens. She told herself she wasn't staying this late to impress him, but some small, silent part of her knew that wasn't entirely true. She wanted him to see her. To really see her, not just as a name on his calendar or someone who brought his coffee, but as someone who mattered. Her hands paused above the keyboard. The numbers were blurring together. She blinked once, then twice. The exhaustion she'd been holding off for days came rushing in like a wave. She tried to stretch, to shake it off, but her eyes were already closing, her head tilted forward. The glow of the screen dimmed as her body gave in to the heaviness. And just like that, Lena Carter fell asleep at her desk. She didn't know how long she was out. Maybe minutes, maybe an hour. But when she woke up, the air felt different. Softer, warmer. She opened her eyes slowly, blinking at the screen still open in front of her. Then she realized something heavy, something warm, was draped over her shoulders. Her fingers reached up, brushing the fabric. It was a coat A very expensive, very familiar coat. Damien's. Her breath caught. She looked up quickly, eyes darting toward his office. He was still at his desk, typing away, expression unreadable. It was as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't just walked over and placed his own jacket over her, while she slept like some strange, silent act of care. Her heart thudded, loud and uneven. She should have shrugged it off, pretended not to notice. But then, she caught it the way his hand paused ever so slightly above the trackpad, just for a second, almost like he was waiting, watching. So instead of pushing the coat away, Lena did something else. She pulled it tighter around her. A silent thank you, a quiet acknowledgement, a shift. She didn't dare look at him again, but she swore she saw the faintest twitch of his lips before he returned to his work. It wasn't a smile, not really, but it wasn't nothing either. She finished the presentation in silence, heart beating too fast, the weight of his coat grounding her in a way she didn't understand. The next morning, she didn't mention it. Neither did he. But something had changed. That day, he didn't correct her when she called a client by their nickname. He didn't roll his eyes when she misunderstood a contract note. And when she brought him his espresso still strong, still without sugar, he actually took a full sip and said, "That'll do." It was almost a compliment. In Damien Voss language, it might have been the equivalent of applause. But the real moment came late that afternoon. Lena had stepped into his office to drop off a file when her gaze fell, just briefly, on a photo hidden beneath a stack of papers on his desk, a small frame. A beautiful woman smiling beside a much younger Damien, eyes bright and full of warmth. She looked familiar, important. Lena didn't mean to stare, but before she could look away, his voice cut through the room like ice. "Put that back." She jumped, fingers freezing above the frame. He stood at the doorway, still and unreadable. I didn't mean to snoop," she stammered, gently sliding the photo back into place. He stepped forward, picked it up himself, and for just a breath of a moment, his fingers lingered on the glass. Then he turned it face down with a soft, sharp exhale. "There are some things I don't discuss, Miss Carter." Lena nodded slowly. Understood. But as she left his office, heart still fluttering from the chill in his voice and the warmth of his coat the night before, she realized something she couldn't unsee. There was a man behind that fortress. And maybe, just maybe, that man wasn't as unreachable as he wanted the world to believe. It was a gray Wednesday morning, the kind that made the whole city feel like it was holding its breath. Lena stood in the break room pouring herself a cup of coffee. Her third of the day, trying to shake off the fog still clinging to her after another late night. She hadn't meant to stay so long at the office again, but lately, her instincts told her that working near Damien Voss was like dancing on a wire. You never knew when the wind might shift, or if he was watching. As the coffee sputtered into her cup, she noticed someone else step into the room. Mrs. Everly, the company's longest, serving executive assistant, moved with the quiet grace of someone who had seen decades come and go in the corporate jungle. She wore a lavender cardigan and the kind of pearl earrings that whispered of class without bragging. She stirred her tea slowly, glancing at Lena with a knowing smile. "You've lasted longer than most," she said casually. Lena blinked. Not sure if that's a compliment or a warning." Mrs. Everly chuckled, her spoon clinking softly against the porcelain. "A bit of both." There was a pause, then something shifted in the older woman's expression. It softened. "Do you know about his family?" she asked quietly. Lena hesitated, her fingers tightening around the coffee cup. "Not really. Just that they owned hotels before him, right?" Mrs. Everly nodded slowly, her gaze drifting to the window as if watching ghosts walk past. His father, Martin Voss, built the first Voss Grand Hotel when Damien was just a child. He was a brilliant man, tough as steel, but he adored his wife and sons. They built the business together, brick by brick. Sons? Lena asked, surprised. He had a brother. Mrs. Everly's eyes dimmed. Julian. 2 years younger. They were inseparable growing up. The kind of bond you don't often see between boys, fierce, protective. The family was everything to them. Lena swallowed hard, sensing change in tone. What happened? The older woman let out a long breath. 7 years ago, the family went on a private yacht trip. Some kind of holiday before a big business expansion. There was an explosion. The official report called it a malfunction. But there were whispers about a rival company, about sabotage. No one could ever prove it. Lena's heart slowed, dread crawling up her spine. They didn't survive. His parents and Julian died instantly. Damien was the only one pulled from the wreckage. Her voice dropped lower. He was 20 years old, and he inherited the entire empire overnight. Lena stood there, coffee forgotten, listening as the pieces fell into place in her mind, his obsession with perfection, his brutal control, the way he kept the world at arm's length, like it was a weapon ready to strike. He changed after that, Mrs. Everly said softly, went cold, closed off. He didn't trust anyone. Not friends, not partners. It was like he decided the only way to survive was to never let anyone close enough to be taken from him again. Lena's chest tightened. Her mind raced through every moment she'd spent in his presence, the way his jaw clenched when she asked personal questions, the way he worked long into the night like sleep was a weakness, the way he had placed that coat over her shoulders with a gentleness he'd never dare admit. She hadn't imagined the weight he carried. He lived with it. Every day. "Thank you," Lena said quietly. Mrs. Everly smiled, touching her shoulder. "You're different. He knows it too. Just be careful, dear." A heart that's been broken, like his, sometimes it cuts when you try to hold it. Lena nodded, her mind spinning as she left the break room. The truth settled over her like mist. Damien Voss wasn't just difficult. He wasn't just difficult. He wasn't just powerful or cold. He was a man who had watched his whole world disappear in a flash and had built a new one from the ashes, one with walls high enough to keep pain out. But walls could also keep love from getting in. That night, she couldn't stop thinking about it. And when she walked into his office the next morning and saw the perfectly arranged desk, the strict lighting, the layers of order he wore like armor, she finally understood. He wasn't trying to be perfect. He was trying to be safe. And for the first time, she didn't just want to prove herself. She wanted to reach him. From that day forward, Lena began to see everything differently. She noticed how Damien's office was always just a few degrees too cold, the lights harsh and white like a hospital ward. She noticed how he kept his desk obsessively clean, how even the pens in the drawer were aligned as if any sign of chaos might unravel something inside him. She noticed how he never ate during the day, not because he forgot, she realized, but because control over even his hunger seemed necessary. He moved through his world like a man on the edge of an invisible cliff, and suddenly she could see every crack in the ground beneath him. So she made a decision. The changes started small, subtle enough that no one else noticed. She swapped out the cold overhead bulbs in his office for softer, warmer lighting. Nothing too obvious, just enough to make the shadows gentler. She brought in a tiny green plant, low maintenance, resilient, and set it on the corner of his desk one morning before he arrived. Oxygen, she mumbled when he finally noticed it, good for the brain. But really, she just wanted to break up the stark black and white palette he lived in. She started keeping an extra coffee on hand, too. Not because he asked for it, but because he always got so absorbed in work he forgot to drink water, let alone eat. Sometimes she left it beside him without a word. Sometimes he didn't even look up, but it was there. He didn't acknowledge the changes at first, not directly, but she saw the way he glanced at the plant now and then, the way he seemed less tense when the lights weren't as bright, the way he actually drank the coffee she left on the third day in a row. It was a Wednesday afternoon when he finally broke the silence. Lena had just set a fresh espresso on his desk, ready to turn and leave when his voice stopped her. "You're changing my office," he said. Not a question, an observation. She stiffened. "If you hate it, I can." "I didn't say I hated it." She looked at him, startled. Damien's eyes were on the plant, not her. His fingers tapped against the desk once, twice, before he leaned back slowly in his chair and tilted his head in her direction. "You really think a plant and a warmer light bulb can fix me?" Lena blinked. "No," she said honestly, "but I think they might make your day just a little less miserable." His lips twitched, just barely, bold. "I've been called worse." He turned back to his screen, but she didn't miss the way his posture shifted just slightly, like something inside him had softened. He didn't say anything else, and neither did she. But as she left the room, she caught a glimpse of something rare, curiosity, maybe even openness. From that moment on, things shifted between them in a way neither of them named. He still barked out orders and expected perfection. She still rolled her eyes when he wasn't looking, but the silences between them weren't quite as sharp. The tension no longer felt dangerous. It felt charged. Late one Friday, after most of the staff had cleared out, Lena was finishing up a last-minute email when she heard something that made her freeze. A laugh. She turned slowly, confused. Damien stood near the window, phone in hand, a real, honest-to-God smirk tugging at his mouth. Not the mocking one he usually wore. This one was real. "You... human..." "You laughed," she blurted before she could stop herself. He turned, raising an eyebrow. "You sound surprised." "I am." He looked back out the window. "People say I don't do that much." Lena tilted her head, studying him. "Maybe they've just never given you a reason to." For a long moment, he didn't reply, just stood there, the city lights dancing across his face. Then he looked at her, and something unspoken passed between them, an understanding neither of them had words for. And in that fragile, flickering silence, Lena realized something that caught her off guard. She was no longer trying to impress Damien Voss. She cared about him. It was supposed to be a quiet afternoon. Lena had just finished sorting Damien's schedule for the week and was reviewing a few flagged emails when the door to the office swung open without warning. The sound of heels clicking sharply against marble filled the space like a drum roll announcing trouble. Lena looked up and froze. The woman who entered didn't need an introduction. Every line of her posture radiated power, effortless, practiced, and unshakable. Her golden hair flowed in perfectly styled waves over her shoulders. A designer dress clung to her like a second skin, every thread screaming wealth. Her makeup was flawless, her gaze even more so sharp as a diamond blade and twice as cold. She didn't look at Lena. Not at first. Her eyes were too busy scanning the space like she owned it. Then Damien stepped out of his office. Lena watched the change in him, subtle but undeniable. His usual blank expression faltered just for a second. It wasn't affection she saw. It wasn't affection she saw. It was something closer to wariness. "Celine," he said coolly, hands in his pockets. She smiled, all teeth and silk. "Damien, it's been too long." Lena stood frozen behind her desk, unsure whether to excuse herself or dissolve into the wall. Damien's presence always filled a room, but next to this woman, even he seemed tenser, more guarded. Celine took a step closer to him, her manicured fingers brushing along the edge of his desk with the kind of familiarity that made Lena's stomach twist. "And this," Celine finally said, turning her head toward Lena like she had just noticed the presence of background furniture, "must be the assistant I've heard so much about." Lena straightened in her chair. "Lena Carter." Celine offered a tight, patronizing smile. "Of course, you're—" Lena didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her face burned, but she refused to look away. "What are you doing here, Celine?" Damien asked flatly. She sighed as if the question bored her. "I'm back in town. Thought it might be nice to catch up. It's been, 2 years?" Her voice dropped, low and intimate. "Or has it really been that long since you pushed everyone away?" Lena pretended to go back to her screen, but her ears strained to catch every word. She'd heard whispers around the office, of course. That Damien had once been engaged. That it had ended abruptly. But she hadn't expected the infamous Celine Marquette to show up like a bomb with red lipstick. "I heard you've been spending quite a lot of time with your assistant," Celine continued, her tone laced with suggestion. She didn't even bother to look at Lena when she said it. "That's new." Damien's jaw ticked, but he didn't reply. Then Celine turned, finally giving Lena her full attention. "Do you really think he's serious about you?" The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. They slid through the air like poison, quiet and lethal. Lena's breath caught. Her hands tightened under the desk. She didn't respond, not because she couldn't, but because Celine had found the one crack in her armor and pressed hard. "You think he's different with you?" Celine asked softly, her smile sharp. "Men like Damien. They don't change, and they certainly don't fall for people like you." With that, she turned on her heels, offered Damien one last smug glance, and walked out, her exit as graceful and dramatic as her entrance. The silence that followed felt deafening. Lena stared at her screen, but the words swam, unreadable. Celine's voice echoed in her head, on a loop. "Do you really think he's serious about you?" She wasn't rich. She wasn't connected. She had no legacy or last name to open doors. She was just Lena. That night, she couldn't sleep. The city buzzed beyond her apartment window, but all she could hear was doubt. Maybe Celine was right. Maybe Celine was right. Maybe she was just another assistant to Damien, just another name in a long list of people who didn't belong in his world. And for the first time since she met him, Lena wondered if she'd made a mistake, letting herself believe in something more. The next morning, Lena walked into the office with her resignation letter tucked neatly inside her bag, every step feeling heavier than the last. She hadn't slept. Not really. Her thoughts had chased each other through the night, circling around Celine's voice, Damien's silence, and the truth she couldn't run from anymore. This wasn't her world. She could dress the part, learn the rules, even thrive under pressure, but deep down, she knew what people like Celine saw when they looked at her. A nobody. A girl from a small town, clinging to a job she was never supposed to have. Maybe she had mistaken kindness for something more. Maybe she had let a few lingering glances and one borrowed coat convince her of a fantasy. She wasn't going to make that mistake again. Damien was in his office when she arrived. His door was open, but his attention was fixed on his phone, brows slightly furrowed as he typed. Lena stood in the doorway for a moment, taking it all in the pristine desk, the quiet hum of the city outside the windows, the man who had somehow become the center of her universe without her even realizing it. He looked up. His expression shifted the moment he saw her. "What is it?" he asked, tone neutral, but there was something beneath it, a flicker of unease. Lena took a deep breath and stepped forward. She placed the envelope gently on his desk. "I'm leaving." Silence. Damien's eyes dropped to the letter, then back to her. "What?" "I'm resigning," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I appreciate everything you've done for me, but I don't belong here." He didn't speak. His gaze darkened, jaw tightening, as he straightened slowly in his chair. "That's not your decision to make." "Yes," she whispered, "it is. And I've already made it." The tension in the room thickened. Damien stood, pushing back his chair. "Is this about Celine?" Lena's breath hitched. He saw it. She could tell he saw the answer in her face. "I don't want to talk about her," she said quickly, turning toward the door. "You're running," he said flatly, "because someone whispered doubt in your ear and you believed it." Lena turned back to him, eyes flashing. "Because she was right. I'm not like you. I don't have money or a legacy or a last name that opens doors. I'm just—" "Stop saying that," Damien snapped, louder than she'd ever heard him. Then, more quietly, "Stop acting like I haven't seen you build your place here from nothing." She shook her head. "It doesn't matter. Because the second someone like her walks in, I'm reminded of who actually belongs in your world." "You think I care about that?" he demanded, stepping closer. "You think any of that means more to me than you?" She couldn't answer, because her throat was too tight. Because her heart was already halfway out the door. So instead, she whispered, "Goodbye, Damien," and walked away. The echo of her footsteps felt final. Damien didn't follow. He stood in place, unmoving, as the sound of the elevator doors closing swallowed the last trace of her. He didn't sit. He didn't speak. He just stood there, staring at the letter on his desk like it had cracked something wide open inside him. Regret was not an emotion he was familiar with. He didn't allow room for it in his world of sharp deals and clean exits. But this wasn't a deal. This was her. And he had just let her slip through his fingers. It wasn't until hours later, when the building had grown quiet and his office lights reflected back at him like judgment in glass, that he allowed himself to admit the truth. She hadn't just walked away. He had driven her away. And for the first time in years, Damien Voss felt the weight of a loss he couldn't fix with power or money or control. Because this wasn't business. It was personal. And he had never been more wrong in his life. The office felt different without her. Damien noticed it immediately, though he refused to admit it to anyone, not even to himself. Her desk sat empty outside his office, the little green plant still alive but beginning to wilt. He hadn't realized how often he glanced in her direction until there was nothing there to see. The silence that once gave him comfort now settled like dust over everything. It didn't feel peaceful. It felt hollow. He tried to bury himself in work, drowning in spreadsheets and back-to-back meetings, but his mind wandered at the worst times mid-presentation, during phone calls, in the elevator between floors. He kept expecting her voice, her quiet knock at the door, her quick, capable hands straightening his schedule. And worse, he missed her presence. The warmth she brought into every room, the subtle way she saw through him without saying a word. He couldn't escape her. Everywhere he turned, she was there. Not physically, but in memory. In the coffee, he now had to fetch himself because no one else remembered how he liked it. In the silent moments between meetings when he used to glance up and find her already watching him, waiting for the next task. In the way his jacket still smelled faintly of her perfume, like a ghost he couldn't shake. Days passed, then a week, and nothing felt right. One evening, long after everyone else had gone home, Damien sat alone in his penthouse, a half-empty glass of whiskey in his hand. The city stretched out before him in glittering silence. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and stared at the floor. Then, without thinking, he stood, crossed the room to his wardrobe, and pulled open a drawer he hadn't touched in weeks. There it was. The vest, the very one she had spilled wine on. He had kept it, he didn't even know why. The deep red stain was still faintly visible, like a scar that never quite faded. His fingers brushed over it slowly, and for the first time since that night, he let the memory play fully in his mind. The sound of the glass shattering, her horrified expression, the way her hands had trembled, voice cracking with panic. She had looked at him like she expected to be destroyed on the spot, but she hadn't run. Even when the whole room stared, even when her manager screamed. She had stayed, and now she was gone. He gripped the vest tighter, jaw clenching. He had spent his entire adult life controlling everything, his image, his empire, his emotions. But the one thing he couldn't control, he realized, was the way she had quietly made a home in his world, without permission. And now her absence echoed louder than her presence ever had. He grabbed his phone, scrolled until her name appeared, Lena Carter, and stared at the screen. His thumb hovered over the call button. Then he pressed it. Voicemail. He didn't leave a message. What would he even say? I was wrong. Come back. I need you. He tossed the phone on the couch and paced. For the first time in his life, Damien canceled everything. Meetings were postponed. A contract he had spent months preparing was pushed back without a second thought. His executive team scrambled, confused by his silence. But he didn't care. None of it mattered, not without her. Within hours, his private jet was on standby. He had her personnel file. Finding her wasn't hard. Small-town girls didn't disappear. The plane touched down in North Carolina, just after sunset. The air was different, softer, quieter, untouched by the cold precision of the city. Damien's car rolled past rows of brick buildings and sleepy diners, until finally he saw her. Lena. Standing behind the counter of a tiny cafe, her hair tied back, an apron around her waist, pouring coffee for a man in overalls. She looked tired, and beautiful, and completely out of reach. For a long moment, Damien didn't move. Then he stepped inside, the bell above the door chiming gently. Lena turned at the sound, and the moment her eyes found him, she froze. She didn't say a word, neither did he. But everything in the air around them shifted. He had come all this way, and he wasn't leaving without her. Lena felt her heart stop for a beat when she saw him standing in the doorway of the cafe. Damien Voss, in all his sharp, polished perfection, looking completely out of place in this small-town setting. His expensive coat, tailored suit, and perfectly combed hair screamed of a world she had tried to leave behind, and for a moment she wondered if she had imagined him entirely. But there he was, standing in the doorway like a storm that had finally caught up with her. The seconds stretched between them, heavy with the unspoken tension that had always existed, but now felt impossible to ignore. She should have turned around. She should have walked away, but something held her in place, as if the gravity of his presence was enough to pull her back. She swallowed, trying to gather the words, but her throat was dry. She tried to hide the shock, the surprise, the vulnerability that threatened to spill over. Instead, she managed a breathless, "What are you doing here?" Damien didn't answer right away. He took a slow step forward, his eyes never leaving hers, as if he was trying to decipher something deeper, something that had remained hidden for far too long. The world outside the cafe was damp with the evening rain, casting a soft glow over everything, but inside, it felt like time had stopped. The hum of the espresso machine, the clink of mugs, everything faded, leaving just the two of them. "I'm not leaving without you," Damien said, his voice low but absolute. Lena's chest tightened, and for a brief moment, she couldn't even find her breath. This man, the one who had made her believe in the impossible, was standing in front of her now, demanding something she didn't know she could give. She glanced at the worn wooden tables, at the cozy, lived, in feel of the cafe that had been her escape, her quiet place from everything. From the city, from him, from the person she thought she was becoming. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, shaking her head as she tried to fight the conflicting emotions that crashed over her like the storm outside. "You don't fit here. This isn't your world." His jaw tightened, but his gaze softened. "You're wrong." She shook her head again, unable to stop the words. "You don't need me. You have everything. Power, money, control. What do I have to offer? That isn't just temporary." Damien's eyes darkened, his expression shifting. "I don't need what you think I need. I spent my entire life building walls, keeping everyone out, keeping everything in order. But you made me feel something I didn't even know I was missing. You made me care about things I thought I'd buried a long time ago." The words hit her like a blow to the chest, a mixture of disbelief and fear swirling inside her. She had never seen him like this. Not the cold, calculated businessman, but the man who had been hidden beneath all that. The man who had wanted something real, something more. "You don't have to prove anything to me," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm not the answer to your problems, Damien. I'm just a girl from Virginia, working in a cafe. I'm not—" "Stop," he cut her off, his voice barely above a whisper, but firm. "You're everything. You always have been." Lena's heart thudded painfully in her chest, the reality of his words crashing over her in waves. She wanted to step back, to pull away, to remind herself that this was all a fantasy. But looking into his eyes, seeing the rawness there, she couldn't. The walls she had spent so much time building around herself were crumbling piece by piece. Damien took another step closer, his voice softer now, yet no less intense. "I'm not leaving without you. Whatever happens, whatever we have to face together, I need you by my side. I want you, Lena." And then he was there, so close she could feel the heat of his presence, his hand gently cupping her face as he tilted her chin up. For a moment, there was nothing but silence between them, just the sound of their breathing, the rain tapping softly against the windows. Damien leaned down, his lips brushing against hers. The kiss was not desperate or rushed, but slow and careful, like it was something they had both been waiting for, something they had both been afraid to admit. His hand slid to the back of her neck, pulling her closer, as if he was afraid that if he let go, she would slip away. When they finally pulled apart, Lena's breath was shaky, her heart still racing in her chest. She looked up at him, searching his eyes for something she couldn't quite put into words. Damien smiled, a small, genuine smile that made something inside her flutter. "We're in this together now," he said softly, his hand still resting on her cheek. "And I'm not going anywhere." For the first time since she'd met him, Lena realized that maybe, just maybe, she hadn't been the one who needed to run away after all. Maybe the person she had been running from was herself. And for the first time in a long time, she let herself believe in something real. A year had passed since that rainy night, and so much had changed. Lena stood in front of the Whitmore Grand Hotel, her fingers brushing against the smooth lapel of her blazer, a soft smile playing on her lips. The towering structure before her gleamed in the soft glow of the streetlights, its grand entrance bathed in the golden light of the grand opening ceremony. She had helped build this, piece by piece, just as she had rebuilt herself, in a world she never thought would embrace her. A few steps behind her, Damien stood, his presence just as commanding as ever. But there was a difference now. There was warmth in the way he looked at her, pride in his eyes, something that hadn't been there before. The old Damien, the one who had been driven solely by ambition, had softened over time, He had let her in, allowed her to change the very core of the empire he had built. And in return, she had done something she never thought possible. She had done something she never thought possible. She had let herself fall in love with him. She glanced at him now, seeing him as he was powerful, driven, yet vulnerable, in a way he had never been before. He had spent so long protecting his heart, building walls high enough to keep everyone out, but she had found a way in. Slowly, gently, until they had built something together that neither of them had ever imagined. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle over her. The hotel, the life they had started together, was just the beginning. There was still so much to come, but she knew, without a doubt, that whatever happened, they would face it together. As the cameras flashed and the crowd cheered, Lena stood beside him, feeling the steady, comforting pressure of his hand on hers. It wasn't just about the hotel or the success that came with it. It was about them, about what they had become. The world saw the power couple, the successful team, but behind closed doors, it was so much more than that. They had become each other's safe haven. Their constant, in a world that was always changing. Damien turned to her, his voice low, just for her. "You're incredible," he murmured, his thumb grazing over her knuckles in a gesture that was as intimate as it was simple. Lena looked up at him, her heart racing. "And you're biased." He chuckled softly, the sound light and full of affection. "Not at all. Just stating facts." She smirked, but there was a soft glow in her eyes, something that spoke of the journey they had taken, of the growth they had both experienced, of the way they had learned to love, not out of need, but out of choice. As the ribbon-cutting ceremony began, the final touches of the event falling perfectly into place, Damien took the microphone, his commanding presence filling the space. His usual air of authority was still there, but there was something more, something warmer, more grounded. "This hotel," he began, his voice steady, "is a testament to the hard work and dedication of my incredible team." And none of this, he said, turning to face Lena, his gaze softening as he looked at her, would be possible without the woman standing beside me today. Lena's breath caught in her throat. She had never been one for attention, never sought the spotlight. But in this moment, with him by her side, she felt a swell of pride she couldn't quite explain. The applause around them was deafening, but it wasn't the accolades that made her feel on top of the world. It was the way he looked at her like she was his equal, like she had always been the missing piece of his puzzle. Damien reached for her hand in front of the crowd, his fingers tightening around hers. The cameras snapped, the lights flashed, but none of it mattered, because in this moment, it was just the two of them. He leaned in, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "I will never let you go again." Lena's heart swelled, and for the first time, she realized how far they had come. From that first spilled glass of wine to this moment, they had built something real, something that wasn't about the mistakes or the perfect image, but about the raw, imperfect connection they shared. "I was never planning on leaving," she whispered back, a smile breaking across her face. As the ceremony continued, with the crowd and the cameras and the flashes, Lena stood beside him, feeling more certain of herself than she ever had. This was her life now, and the person she was meant to be was the one standing next to him. A year ago, she had been terrified of everything this city represented. Now, as she looked at Damien, truly looked at him, she realized that the greatest love stories didn't always begin with grand gestures or perfect timing. Sometimes they began with small, unexpected moments like the simplest of mistakes that turned into something so much more. And for Lena, standing here now, this was only the beginning. With Damien, the journey was just getting started. The sun hung low in the sky as Lena made her way to the office the next morning. The week had been chaotic meetings, presentations, endless emails, but something felt different today. The air seemed heavier, filled with a quiet anticipation she couldn't shake. Every step felt deliberate, like she was walking toward a new chapter, one she wasn't sure she was ready for. She pushed the heavy glass doors open, the sound of it echoing in the empty lobby. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble floor as she made her way to her desk, her heart pounding in her chest. The office was quieter than usual, a strange hush that seemed to hang in the air, thick with the weight of unspoken tension. Lena set her things down and glanced over at Damien's office. The door was cracked open, and she could see him inside, hunched over his desk, his fingers flying over the keyboard as usual. He didn't look up when she entered, but she knew he was aware of her presence. There was something about the way his shoulders were drawn tight, the way his jaw clenched whenever he was deep in thought. He had been like this ever since the gala a week ago, ever since she had left his office that night with nothing more than an empty promise in her heart. The silence between them had grown since then. It wasn't that they didn't speak. It was just that every word felt like it carried more weight than before. There was something unsaid hanging in the air between them, something they both felt but hadn't addressed. Lena sat at her desk, trying to focus on the tasks in front of her, but her thoughts kept wandering back to that night. Damien had kissed her, held her like she was the most important thing in his world, and for the first time in a long time, she had felt the walls inside her crumble. But then, as quickly as it had happened, he pulled away. He didn't say anything. He just walked back into his office, leaving her standing there, heart racing, unsure of what to do with the pieces of herself he had so effortlessly scattered. Her fingers hovered over her keyboard as the minutes ticked by, each one dragging painfully. Finally, she couldn't stand it any longer. She got up, walked over to Damien's office, and knocked softly on the doorframe. His head snapped up, his icy blue eyes locking with hers for the briefest of seconds. He didn't say anything, but his gaze held her there, the weight of it pressing down on her chest. For a moment, neither of them moved. The world outside seemed to blur, the noise of the office fading into nothingness. Then, slowly, Damien stood up from his desk and walked toward her. Lena's breath caught in her throat as he stopped just inches away, his presence overwhelming in the confined space. His eyes softened, the familiar hardness in them melting away for the first time in weeks. "I've been waiting for you to come to me," he said, his voice quiet but firm. The words hit her like a punch to the gut, and she had to swallow the lump in her throat before she could speak. "I didn't know if I should," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've been distant, and I didn't want to push." Damien's lips twitched in the smallest of smiles. "I didn't know how to handle this either," he said, stepping closer. "But I can't ignore what's been happening between us. I can't keep pretending that I don't need you." Lena's heart raced. She had always thought of Damien as someone who had everything under control, someone who didn't need anyone. But standing here, with him inches away, she realized just how much he had been holding back. The walls he had built around himself weren't made of stone, they were made of fear. Fear of losing what he had fought so hard to create. Fear of letting someone in. She reached out, her hand brushing against his. It was the smallest of gestures, but it was everything. It was the moment everything shifted, the moment they both stopped pretending. Damien took her hand in his grip warm and steady. "I can't promise that everything will be easy," he said softly. "But I can promise that I'll never let you go." Lena's breath hitched, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she let herself believe in something. She let herself believe in them. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. And in that moment, The uncertainty, the doubt, and the fear that had plagued her for so long melted away. It was just them, now two people who had been brought together by fate, by mistakes, by the unexpected, and no matter what came next, they would face it together. The world outside the office felt distant now, insignificant. What mattered was what they had built, what they were building together. And for the first time in a long time, Lena didn't feel like she was just a small town girl trying to survive in a world that didn't belong to her. She felt like she had finally found her place. And it was with him. The journey of Lena and Damien teaches us that life's most meaningful connections don't always come from perfection or grand plans. They come from vulnerability, growth, and the willingness to embrace the unexpected. Both characters started in very different places, yet it was through their mistakes, misunderstandings, and moments of deep self-reflection that they found something real. Damien's journey of opening up, of letting go of control, and Lena's growth in believing in her worth were pivotal in making their love story work. In life, we often fear vulnerability, thinking it will expose our weaknesses or leave us open to disappointment. But true strength comes from allowing ourselves to be imperfect, to fall and to rise again. The lesson here is that when we stop running from what scares us, when we embrace who we really are, flaws, and all, that's when we discover our true strength, our true selves, and sometimes even true love. The story reminds us that we are worthy of love, not because of what we have or what we've built, but simply because we are enough as we are. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? If you enjoy this story and want more, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel for more emotional and inspiring tales. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you in the next story.